I never thought I'd be standing in my backyard, staring at a pool that looked like it had been filled with radioactive soup. But there I was at 7 in the morning, jaw clenched, coffee forgotten on the patio table, watching oily green sludge bubble on the surface of my once clear water. 3 hours earlier, my security camera had picked up someone sneaking around the side of my property. A person dragging 2 large plastic containers. By the time I got the alert, it was too late. The deed was done. And I knew exactly who it was. Odessa Montgomery, president of the Sycamore Bluffs HOA. Middle-aged tyrant in pastel cardigans and oversized sunglasses. If she wasn't harassing people about mailbox paint or lawn edging, she was sneaking through side gates in the middle of the night like a raccoon with a clipboard. I'd had run-ins with her before. I'd moved into Sycamore Bluffs 2 years ago. Me, Brandon Ashford, divorced, HVAC contractor, and proud owner of the only solar-paneled ranch house on the block. From the first week, she had it out for me. You can't hang work boots on the porch railing, it's unsightly. Your truck exceeds the neighborhood's decibel limit when it starts. You can't have a brushed nickel mailbox, it must be flat black. I filed formal complaints. I even went to the city once. But Odessa always slithered her way out, claiming it was all about maintaining neighborhood standards. But dumping toxic waste in my pool? That was a whole new level of unhinged. I didn't touch anything. I grabbed my phone, pulled up the footage again, zoomed in. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m. Odessa wearing a bathrobe and garden gloves, heaving 2 giant containers over the fence. She opened one and this thick, syrupy sludge poured out. Then she did the second. She actually wiped her hands on my pool skimmer net when she was done. I called the police. Then I called the county environmental protection office. By noon, half the block was staring at the hazmat truck parked in front of my house. Yellow tape stretched across my backyard. 2 guys in suits and respirators were taking samples from the pool. An officer named Rodriguez pulled me aside. "This is serious stuff, Mr. Ashford. You said you have footage?" I handed him the tablet. He watched it, his eyebrows climbing steadily. "That's her," I said. "Odessa Montgomery, president of the HOA. Rodriguez nodded. "We'll need to bring her in for questioning. And we're going to test this stuff, see what it is. But from the look of it, you're looking at industrial solvents. Illegal dumping." I didn't say anything. I just looked over at her house 3 doors down, pale yellow siding, American flag waving proudly from the porch. The curtains twitched. She knew we were onto her. But what she didn't know was that I'd already pulled up the HOA's annual report from last year. And buried in the expense section $23,000 labeled groundskeeping chemical disposal. Curious, since we don't have any communal grounds. Just a tiny park with a few benches and a sandbox that smells like wet dog. A few hours later, Odessa came marching up my driveway like she owned the pavement. "You called the police on me?" Her voice sounded like she gargled gravel and disappointment. She wore a pink blouse and pearls like she was going to Sunday brunch instead of confronting a felony. I crossed my arms. "You dumped chemical waste in my pool." "You're lucky I didn't call the news," she scoffed. "That was not chemical waste. That was eco-friendly algae treatment. I was helping you." I laughed. "At 3 in the morning?" She narrowed her eyes. "You've been openly defying HOA regulations for months. Your grass is always half an inch too long. And your truck is parked facing the wrong direction. You've created a hostile environment." Rodriguez stepped out from the backyard. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us." Odessa turned to him, horrified. "Excuse me? I am the HOA president. I have full authority over the community." Rodriguez held up the tablet. "We have you on video trespassing and dumping unknown liquid into a private pool. That's illegal disposal and trespassing. You can explain the rest downtown." She tried to protest. Something about bylaws and community service, but the handcuffs said otherwise. The next day, I got a letter hand-delivered by one of Odessa's little HOA minions, some guy named Leonard, who only speaks in passive-aggressive size. The letter claimed I owed $400 in fines for unauthorized pool maintenance and disrupting neighborhood harmony. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off my porch steps. I scanned the letter, stapled a copy of the police report to it, and sent it straight to the county court with my formal complaint. I'd started a civil suit for property damage and environmental violations. My lawyer, a guy named Darren who used to specialize in corporate fraud, grinned when he saw the footage. "Oh, this is gold," he said. "She's not just going to pay for the cleanup. We're talking punitive damages. Maybe even jail time if that waste tests positive for what I think it is. By the end of the week, the lab confirmed it. Benzene, trichloroethylene, and something called methyl ethyl death. I'm not even joking. Stuff that hadn't been legal to use in landscaping since the 90s. Odessa had apparently been storing leftover chemicals from a company her late husband used to run. And instead of disposing of them properly, she dumped them in my pool to avoid disposal fees. The county slapped her with a $25,000 fine. Cleanup cost her another $12,000. I didn't even have to touch a dime. But it wasn't over. Because once the HOA board realized she'd used community funds to cover up her personal stash of illegal chemicals, the house of cards started to fall. I got a knock on my door from Jordan Patel, a soft-spoken software engineer who lived across the street. I think Odessa's been falsifying the HOA books, he said quietly. I've been treasurer for a year, and none of those chemical disposal charges ever came through me. So we started digging. And what we found? Odessa had been running this HOA like her personal kingdom for over a decade. Falsified fines. Phantom vendors. She even approved a $10,000 holiday lighting expense that turned out to be a set of solar-powered flamingos for her yard. By the time we were done, the entire community wanted blood. Or at least a new president. The first board meeting after Odessa's arrest was a circus. It was held in the clubhouse, a beige stucco building that smelled like dust and lemon floor wax. When I walked in, every seat was taken. People stood along walls, arms crossed, whispering beneath the humming ceiling fans. Leonard sat stiffly at the end of the folding table up front, flanked by two other board members who looked like they'd aged 5 years in the past week. Odessa's chair was conspicuously empty, her laminated nameplate removed. Jordan motioned me over from the corner, holding a manila folder so thick it looked like it had been stuffed with crime scene evidence. She kept everything in binders in her garage, Jordan said, flipping it open. Receipts, invoices, even printouts of email chains. She was either incredibly arrogant or had no idea what a paper trail meant. I scanned one of the pages. It was an invoice from a landscaping company that didn't exist. Same address as a pet grooming service in Albuquerque. Think anyone else on the board was in on this? Not sure yet, Jordan said. But Leonard's acting like someone who knows the walls are closing in. As if on cue, Leonard banged his gavel against the plastic tabletop. Order, please. We're calling this emergency meeting to address community concerns and interim leadership. He droned on, but nobody was listening. Phones were out. People were snapping photos of the stack of paperwork Jordan had laid out across the community bulletin board. One woman gasped when she recognized her own signature on a violation notice she swore she never authorized. I raised my hand. Leonard hesitated. Mr. Ashford, this isn't a public forum. Actually, I interrupted, per the HOA charter, any homeowner has the right to address the board if more than 15 members are present. I counted 38. Muffled laughter rippled through the room. Leonard's neck flushed a splotchy red, but he stepped back. I turned to face the crowd. Some of you know me. Some of you only know the version Odessa warned you about. But I've got security footage, police reports, and environmental test results that prove she not only trespassed on my property and dumped toxic waste in my pool, she also used our community funds to cover her tracks. A man in the back raised his hand. You're the guy with the solar panels, right? Yeah. And I just found out those were the basis for 4 separate fines that never made it into the HOA's official ledger. Know why? Because Odessa kept a second set of books. Gasps spread like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. Jordan stood. We recovered over 70 falsified invoices. At least 20 of them were for services that never happened. One is for a tree trimming company that was dissolved in 2009. Another is a neighborhood beautification consultant who turns out to be Odessa's niece. She was billing us $700 a month to advise on shrub placements. Leonard tried to interject, but people were no longer paying attention to him. They had questions. Real ones. And they weren't interested in scripted answers. How long has this been going on? Who approved the budgets? Where's the rest of the money? A woman near the front stood up. My husband and I paid a $2,000 fine last year because our fence was the wrong shade of white. Now I find out there isn't a single policy in the bylaws about fence color. Jordan nodded grimly. Correct. That was something Odessa added to the violation forms but never voted on. We checked the records, there was never a community vote. That's when someone pulled out their phone and called the district attorney's tip line. Loudly. On speaker. By the end of the meeting, 3 board members had resigned. Leonard stormed out after someone found his signature on a reimbursement form for a pressure washing job that never happened. He swore he was just following orders, but nobody cared anymore. 2 days later, a subpoena was issued for the HOA's financial records. I got a call from Detective Harlan with the Financial Crimes Unit. Her voice was clipped, professional. We're pursuing a joint case with the County District Attorney's Office. Based on the documentation you and Mr. Patel provided, we're looking at charges including misappropriation of community funds, fraud, and environmental violations. We've expanded the investigation to include any vendors listed in the HOA's records. I asked what that meant in plain English. It means your HOA president might have been running a shell game with community money for years. And she's not the only one we're looking at. There was a knock on my door the next morning. I opened it to find a tall, wiry man in a charcoal suit holding a leather briefcase. Thin gold glasses. No smile. Mr. Ashford? My name's Caleb Lunsford. I represent a group of Sycamore Bluffs homeowners. We're preparing a class action civil suit against the HOA and its former leadership. I stepped aside. Come in. He sat at my kitchen table and laid out the strategy. Over 24 homeowners had reached out with stories of fines they couldn't validate, landscaping charges for services they never received, and mandatory security assessments that coincided with Odessa's luxury upgrades. She installed a hot tub last year, Lunsford said, tapping a photo. Paid in cash, according to the contractor. That happened the same month the HOA paid out over $12,000 to a community safety consultant, who doesn't appear to exist. I handed him a USB drive. Every file we pulled from the garage binders. Jordan digitized them. Lunsford's expression didn't change, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. You just made a lot of people's cases a whole lot stronger. The following week, a community vote was held to dissolve the current HOA board entirely. The turnout was overwhelming. Out of 127 homes, 112 voted. All in favor. A temporary oversight committee was formed. Jordan was appointed interim chair. He asked me to serve as head of the transparency subcommittee. I accepted under one condition. No more fines without photographic evidence and timestamped documentation. And every board meeting gets recorded and archived publicly. He agreed. We also found something else buried in Odessa's files. A signed letter from 2 years ago addressed to the city council requesting a zoning change for a parcel of land bordering Sycamore Bluffs. The letter claimed it was a community decision to rezone the land as private HOA property, not public access. It was signed with forged names, mine included. That parcel? It was supposed to become a dog park, but the zoning change blocked public funding. Instead, Odessa had plans drawn up for a community meditation garden complete with a koi pond and decorative fountains. The contractor listed on the plans? Her brother-in-law. We turned it over to the city. Within days, the city council launched a formal audit. The zoning request was revoked. The parcel was returned to public status. And the city greenlit the dog park construction. The neighborhood was changing fast. The dead shrubs lining the clubhouse were pulled and replaced with native pollinator plants, courtesy of a local Boy Scout troop. The playground got new mulch and a splash pad. Even my neighbor, who used to glare at me every time I parked my truck outside, stopped to compliment the new solar-powered street lamps Jordan helped install. And Odessa? She was still out on bail, but her trial date was set. I heard her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested. Too many people. Too much money. Too many lies. I got a call from Detective Harlan the morning the final charge was added. Money laundering, she said. Turns out she used HOA checks to buy gift cards, then laundered the money through online retailers. We traced over $30,000. I asked what kind of sentence she was looking at. If convicted on all counts? 15 years. Maybe more. Depends on whether she flips on anyone else. She didn't have to. Leonard had already started talking. By the time the sun set that evening, I was sitting on my porch with a cold beer, watching kids ride scooters down the sidewalk. One of them waved. Hey, Mr. Ashford. They're planting cherry trees in the park tomorrow. I raised my bottle in salute. Make sure they leave space for the big dogs. The kid laughed and sped off. For the first time since I'd moved in, Sycamore Bluffs felt like a neighborhood, not a gated fiefdom. And all it had taken was one woman mistaking my backyard for a chemical dumping site. It was 2 weeks after Odessa's arrest when the neighborhood really started unraveling. With the HOA board dissolved and the temporary oversight committee just barely holding things together, more residents came forward with stories that made the original chemical dumping seem almost quaint by comparison. It started with an elderly couple, the Meachams, who lived near the southern cul-de-sac. They were quiet folks, always kept to themselves. They showed up at a Saturday community meeting and handed Jordan a faded manila envelope. Inside were letters, real ones, not emails dated over the past 3 years. Each one was a demand for payment regarding an unauthorized property expansion, citing a non-existent code. The letters had HOA letterheads, but the signature at the bottom wasn't Odessa's. It was Leonard's. Jordan read them aloud, hands trembling slightly. The Meachams had paid over $6,000 in settlement fees for supposedly extending their garden bed 3 feet past the property line. There was no permit violation. No city order, just threats of liens and escalating penalties until they gave in. "I still have the receipts," Mr. Meacham said, his voice dry as sand. "Money orders made out to something called Sycamore Property Compliance Services." When I heard that name, something clicked. I pulled up the vendor list from the files Odessa had hoarded in her garage. There it was, Sycamore Property Compliance Services. Paid monthly consulting fees for property enforcement review. But the address? A P.O. box in a strip mall across town. We dug harder. Jordan got a buddy of his from high school who worked for the county recorder's office to run a search on the business name. Turns out it was registered under a shell corporation linked to a law firm that had represented Odessa's late husband's estate. The paper trail led in a wide, looping spiral, but it always came back to the same handful of names. Odessa, Leonard, and a third person we hadn't heard of before, Margaret Elwell. According to HOA meeting minutes from 5 years ago, she had once served as Community Compliance Secretary, a position that no longer existed. She'd moved away 3 years prior, but her name showed up on dozens of invoices and internal memos. "Looks like they created a fake company to extort homeowners," Jordan said, lining up printouts across his dining table. "And they didn't even try that hard to cover it up. We took the evidence straight to the county prosecutor's office. A week later, subpoenas were issued for Leonard and Margaret. Margaret was tracked down in Arizona. Leonard was picked up at a golf course outside the city limits, halfway through a round with a group of smug-looking men in visors. The charges? Racketeering, wire fraud, and elder abuse. The last one hit hardest. Turns out the Meachams weren't the only senior residents coerced into paying fake fees. At least 9 others came forward, some with canceled checks, others with notarized payment agreements forged with fake legalese. Detective Harlan called me the next morning. "We're opening a secondary case," she said. "This goes beyond HOA mismanagement. It's organized financial exploitation. You may end up being a key witness." I wasn't thrilled about that. I preferred my role as the guy who fixed air conditioners and kept to himself unless someone dropped a barrel of toxins in my backyard. But I agreed. 3 days later, I got a certified letter from the district attorney's office. I was officially listed as a cooperating witness in a criminal investigation involving multiple felony counts. I signed the acknowledgement, filed it in my kitchen drawer, and poured myself a double shot of bourbon. That same evening, Jordan and I met with a retired judge named Linda Caro. She lived in a modest 2-story home on the edge of the development. We hadn't known she was a judge until she showed up at the dog park with a binder labeled HOA Emergency Protocols Revised. "I never liked Odessa," she said, flipping through tabs. "Always thought she had the ethics of a wet paper towel. I didn't want to get involved before because I didn't have hard proof. Now I do." She laid out a plan to transition the Oversight Committee into a formal homeowner-led council, one that operated under municipal transparency standards. No more closed-door meetings. No more rubber stamping fines. Everything would be logged, recorded, and subject to review. "I can draft the legal framework," she said, "but you'll need to get 51% of the homeowners to sign a petition to amend the HOA's charter." It took us 5 days. People were angry. Not just about the money. It was the betrayal. The idea that neighbors who were supposed to protect the block had spent years squeezing every cent they could from the most vulnerable among them. I stopped by the Meacham's house after we hit the signature threshold. Mr. Meacham opened the door, his posture straighter than I'd ever seen. "You get enough?" he asked. "We did." He nodded once and stepped back inside. The next week, we held a charter amendment vote on the clubhouse lawn. Tables were set up with clipboards and snacks. Jordan brought his sister's speaker system and we played soul music while people signed and chatted. There were dogs roaming around, kids chasing bubbles. For the first time, it felt like a block party instead of a courtroom. The new charter passed by a landslide. Judge Caro filed it with the county, and just like that, the old HOA was gone. In its place was the Sycamore Homeowners Council, a body composed of 7 elected members who served 1-year terms with no re-elections beyond 2 cycles. All financial decisions had to be posted online 72 hours before a vote. Violations required photographic proof and a 2-member review. And best of all, no more secret vendors. Every contract had to be bid on publicly and every invoice cross-checked by a 3-person audit team. Lunsford, the attorney from before, filed the class action suit 2 days later. 38 plaintiffs in total. The civil case would take time, but the criminal one was moving fast. Leonard had flipped and Margaret was already negotiating a plea deal. Odessa, meanwhile, had gone radio silent. Her house sat empty, the grass browning, flyers accumulating on the porch. She'd made bail, but her court appearances were mandatory. The trial was set for summer. One morning, I got a call from a reporter with the local paper. She'd heard about the council transition and wanted to interview someone about how the community had turned things around. I told her I wasn't the right guy. She asked who was. I gave her Jordan's name. That weekend, the story ran on the front page. From corruption to community. How one neighborhood took back control. I clipped the article and slipped it into a folder with the court documents. Not because I wanted to relive it, but because I never wanted to forget how bad things had gotten before they got better. About a month later, I came home to find a group of residents gathered on my driveway. They'd brought folding chairs, lemonade, and a stack of ballots. "Brandon," one of them said, "we want you to run for council." I laughed. "You sure about that?" "I'm not exactly the diplomatic type." "We don't need diplomatic," another neighbor said. "We need someone who sees things clearly. Someone who doesn't flinch." I agreed on one condition. I'd serve 1 term only. No re-election. Just enough time to help set the foundation and make sure the next group knew the story of what happened. We held the election in June. I won a seat alongside Jordan, Judge Caro, and 4 others, including a single mom who worked nights at the hospital and a retired firefighter who'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone still standing. At our first official meeting, we passed a motion to start a community assistance fund for residents facing financial hardship. A portion of the settlement money from the class action suit would seed it. The rest would come from voluntary contributions and community events. No fines. No threats. Just help offered freely. We also introduced a new rule: any council member caught using their position for personal gain would be permanently barred from holding leadership in any neighborhood organization. And we published the names of the old board across a public archive, with links to the charges and case outcomes. Not out of spite, out of memory, so no one would forget what happens when a neighborhood forgets how to hold its leaders accountable. The trial for Odessa started in midsummer. I sat in the gallery on the first day behind the Meachams. When the prosecution played the footage of her dumping sludge into my pool, the room went dead silent. The judge didn't look up. He just wrote something down and nodded once. Took the jury less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing to follow. I left the courthouse without looking back. There was a barbecue that weekend. The new park had just opened. Kids ran through the splash pad. Someone fired up a grill. I sat at the edge of it all, sipping a beer and watching the sun drop behind the rooftops. We'd been through a fire, but somehow we'd come out cleaner on the other side. The sentencing hearing drew a crowd. Not just neighbors, not just the plaintiffs from the civil case, reporters, environmental activists, even a few city officials showed up. The courtroom gallery filled long before the bailiff called things to order. I sat near the back. Jordan was up front, flanked by the Meachams and 2 others from the original oversight committee. A woman from the State Environmental Bureau took notes silently beside me. Outside the courthouse, camera crews were setting up, angling for the shot of the year, a former HOA president in a tailored blazer and pearls being handed down a sentence for environmental crimes and financial fraud. Odessa didn't look the same. The smugness was gone. Her hair was flat, her makeup muted, her blazer borrowed from someone 3 sizes larger. She stood with her attorney, shoulders rigid, chin tilted like she was trying to keep her neck above water. But her eyes were tired. Not broken, just worn down by the weight of being caught. The judge spoke without theatrical flair. Having reviewed the extensive evidence provided in this case, including video documentation, financial records, and testimony from over 30 residents, this court finds the defendant guilty on all counts. The charges include illegal chemical disposal, conspiracy to defraud, elder financial exploitation, and misuse of community funds. He paused long enough for Odessa to shift her weight. Then he continued, I hereby sentence you to 16 years with eligibility for parole after 12. In addition, the court orders restitution in the amount of $172,000 to be paid to the victims of your actions, along with full reimbursement of cleanup costs incurred by the county. There was no reaction from her. No gasp. No tears. Just a slow, defeated blink. Odessa was escorted out the side door by 2 deputies, her heels clicking once before she disappeared from view. No cuffs. But she didn't need them. She walked like a woman who knew she was never coming back to the life she'd built. The judge turned to the gallery. This community has endured something deeply corrosive, not just environmental damage, but a breakdown of trust. Let today mark the beginning of your recovery, not the end of your grievances. That line stuck with me. Back in Sycamore Bluffs, recovery wasn't just a metaphor. We were still dealing with the physical aftermath of Odessa's schemes. Soil tests from backyards near her home had shown dangerous concentrations of VOCs, the same chemicals she'd dumped in my pool. Apparently, she'd been disposing of hazardous waste in more than one place. Her side yard, for one. A narrow strip of pavers and dead grass that had soaked up years of runoff from unlabeled barrels. The county stepped in again, this time roping in the state's Department of Environmental Quality. They brought in ground-penetrating radar and started flagging areas for excavation. Everything from her lot line to the slope behind the old clubhouse had to be dug up, treated, and remediated. The cleanup took over 6 weeks and revealed something no one expected. Buried barrels. 3 of them. Rusted through, leaking contaminants into the groundwater. That discovery took things to a whole new level. State investigators opened a separate file. Not just on Odessa, but on the defunct landscaping company her late husband once operated. Turns out the property had been used as a dumping ground before Odessa ever became HOA president. But instead of contacting the proper authorities when she inherited the mess, she'd quietly covered it up and kept adding to it. The state classified the area as a hazardous site. Crews sealed off a 100-foot radius around the old clubhouse and began installing vapor barriers and monitoring wells. The area was declared off-limits to residents for the foreseeable future. The city revoked the HOA's previous permits and issued an emergency zoning amendment, stripping the community's oversight rights over that parcel permanently. But we weren't angry. Not anymore. We were focused. The new council voted unanimously to repurpose the rest of the land into a community utility easement and greenbelt buffer. No more ornamental koi ponds or meditation gardens. Just native plants, walking paths, and open space maintained by city workers. In the meantime, the civil suit reached a settlement. Lunsford secured a structured payout from Odessa's remaining assets, her house, a few investment accounts, and a small trust fund she hadn't touched in years. Each plaintiff received a portion based on the severity of the financial harm they'd suffered. The Meachams used their payout to install a new ramp and widen their front entrance. Another couple had their roof replaced. A few people set up college accounts for their kids and grandkids. I used mine to upgrade my work van and install a set of solar batteries in my garage. Not flashy, just useful. The final ripple came quietly. One of Odessa's former board allies, a man named Bryce who had mostly stayed in the background, approached the council. He wanted to return the funds he'd received for consulting. Said it felt wrong to keep them, even if he hadn't known the full extent of Odessa's crimes. We accepted the check and used it to start a new neighborhood initiative. Not another HOA. Not even a council-led project. Just a rotating volunteer committee that organized things like tree plantings, driveway shoveling for seniors, and an annual block party. We called it Sycamore Together. No dues, no fines, just help. By fall, the environmental barriers were taken down. The soil had been cleared, treated, and deemed safe. The county installed a small sign at the edge of the greenbelt explaining the cleanup project and the importance of responsible waste disposal. It didn't mention Odessa by name. It didn't have to. Everyone knew the story. Some new families moved in around that time. A young couple with a toddler bought the corner lot next to mine. The dad was an EMT. The mom worked for the school district. They asked about the solar panels and the rain capture system I'd set up. I gave them a tour. "You're the reason everything changed, aren't you?" the dad asked as we stood in my driveway. I shook my head. "Nah. I was just the guy who had a camera running when the dam broke." He laughed, but his wife looked thoughtful. "It matters. That someone said something. That you didn't let it get swept under the rug." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. That winter, the council terms rotated. I stepped down just like I said I would. A local school counselor took my seat. She had plans for an after-school tutoring program and a community pantry. I stayed on as a volunteer, helping with maintenance and repairs where I could. Life settled into something steady. Better. The kind of neighborhood where people waved when they drove by, where block parties didn't need permits because everyone pitched in. No more letters taped to doors. No more threats disguised as policy. One afternoon, as spring crept back in, I walked past the greenbelt with a thermos of coffee. The grass was coming back. The saplings we'd planted in the fall were starting to bud. I stopped at the sign the county had posted and read it again. Site remediated in accordance with state guidelines. Formerly zoned private. Now protected for community use. Below that, someone had taped a handwritten note in plastic. "Thanks to the neighbors who spoke up." I didn't know who wrote it. Didn't have to. As I stood there, a breeze picked up carrying the smell of fresh earth and pollen. Somewhere nearby, a kid yelled for someone to watch as they kicked a soccer ball. A dog barked. A lawnmower buzzed faintly in the distance. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that came from silence. The kind that came from peace. And I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. Not even at Odessa. Just a deep, settled sense of knowing we'd faced something rotten and pulled it out by the roots. Together. Some stories end with applause or headlines or dramatic exits. Ours ended with a park where poison used to be. And if that's not justice, I don't know what is.